Please subscribe to this channel, so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 161. The 8 Grand Masters. Jun Moxie smiled as if he wasn't at fault and then waved his hands to gesture his 2 men to bring forth the jars of wine they were carrying. The eyes of everyone present immediately shifted to the jars as the 2 men set them on the table. What's this? Only 2 jars, the prince was somewhat disappointed. You think these 2 jars are insufficient? Jun Moxie batted his eyelids. These jars are worth 11,000 taels of silver each, which makes their combined worth 22,000 taels of silver. Old Song grunted, I've never heard of a wine which costs 11,000. The price of this is over 100 times of what a wine should normally cost. So this itself is an eye-opener for me. It was rather obvious that Old Song was being sarcastic. A man with limited knowledge and experience always thinks big of himself. You haven't seen every nook and corner of this world yet. Jun Moxie replied back bluntly, what are you waiting for? Hurry up. I need to go back early tonight. I've really never seen a blend of wine which is worthy of being this expensive. The arrogance of the youngster obviously angered the 3 men. The man in black sized up the jar. The wine looks fairly normal to me. I don't think it's that special. You really won't be able to tell the quality of the wine, and which one is better unless you've tasted them first. Jun Moxie replied coldly. The 3 guests sat down on their chairs. The 2 judges had already made up their minds. If the 2 wines are similar, or even if this youngster's wine is slightly better, we'll still vote for Old Song. Just look at this kid. He's way too arrogant. 1 small jar of wine for over 10,000 taels of silver. No one can afford this. This wine could empty the state treasury. Oh. I didn't realize that there was a little girl present here. Jun Moxie looked at Yang Mo, you're very pretty. You'll certainly turn into a very beautiful woman once you grow up. Hee hee. I'm a man. I'm a big man. Little Mo Yang retorted furiously as he let go of his father's clothes and clenched his fists tightly, while his big and round eyes glared sharply at Jun Moxie. Really? I don't think so. You even sound like a girl. Jun Moxie shook his head as he tilted his head to glare back at the boy. Maybe you should peek down your pants and confirm it. Jun Moxie was obviously joking around. Young boys don't have coarse voices. I'm a man. The little boy tightly clutched his waistband as his face started to flush with the embarrassing thought of removing his pants to affirm his manhood. Maybe you're a man. Jun Moxie smiled evilly, but you still look like a young female version of him. He said, pointing towards the prince. I am a man, the little guy shouted back in a sharp voice, and that's because he's my father. Ha ha. Everyone broke into laughter at the same time. Jun Moxie rubbed his hair. Well, good. I won't say that again. So let's just believe that you're a man. Okay? Well. The little guy didn't understand Jun Moxie's words properly, but came closer to him and whispered in his ear, if you don't believe me, then I'll remove my pants and show you. Jun Moxie was left dumbstruck and beaten. Even though the boy whispered this into Jun Moxie's ears, everyone obviously heard it. The men present in the shop were all experts, and their senses were extremely sharp. Even if the boy had whispered this in an even softer tone, they would have all still heard it very clearly. Everyone obviously burst into laughter once again, and the atmosphere in the room suddenly eased down. Jun Moxie secretly smiled. The hitman was experienced enough to understand that it is better to have a contest in a harmonious environment since it helps in maintaining order. This kid is definitely going to be somebody someday. Realizing that the kid had a lot of fire within, Jun Moxie decided to leave the kid alone, for his own good. Old Song went into the back room and returned carrying 2 jars in his hands. The thick cover of dust on the jars made it evident that these jars had been in storage for a long time now. Since you've only brought 2 jars of wine, I must also produce only 2, for the sake of fairness. Old Song was very proud of these 2 jars of wine. He had traveled across mountain and rivers to procure the materials for this wine during the prime years of his life, and had fermented this wine with all his skill. This wine is 28 years old. I crossed snow-cladded mountains, glaciers, rivers, lakes, forests. I spent 5 years traveling around the world to find the right materials for this wine during the prime of my years. Old Song's face reflected a hint of sadness. These 2 jars contain the last remaining samples of my finest creation. His words incited a strong interest in the hearts of the solitary falcon and the prince. You traveled the world for 5 years to find the right ingredients for making a wine. The solitary falcon shook his head. That sounds a little far-fetched to me. But that itself makes this wine worthy of greatness. Worthy? He. Old Song smiled in a strange manner, seemingly a bit hurt. This wine is the best wine that I've ever made. The best in the world. Well, the quality of the wine is secondary, but your sheer dedication is worthy of praise. Jun Moxie applauded. However, dedication isn't synonymous with success. The quality of the wine isn't decided by the effort that goes into making it. The 3 men immediately glared at Jun Moxie. It was obvious that his words had offended them again. Dedication isn't synonymous with success? Okay, maybe this wine isn't the best in the world. But what is he trying to imply here? Does he mean that the referees may be biased? The solitary falcon looked at Jun Moxie coldly. The youngster he had taken a liking to earlier was now turning to someone really annoying. He's singing a completely different tune now, and it seems that he's also questioned my ability to judge. He couldn't help asking in a cold manner, "Young man, what do you mean? Dedication isn't important?" Of all the success stories from the past, can you recall even one where the person managed to achieve something great without persistence? Dedication is important, but it all depends on the value of that dedication, and whether the goal is worthy of it or not. Jun Moxie stated fearlessly, dedication paves the way for success, and should always be admired. But if you're dedicated to a lost cause, then you're no more than a fool. And yes, all the successful people in the world have always had one thing in common: persistence. Once they identified a goal, they never back off, and worked very hard to build something great, which is why their stories serve as an example to us all. For example, Tian Xiang's founding emperor, Yang Kai Tian, worked his Xian Qi to the peak. Everyone knows about that. So you're right about that. But there are several other masters at the peak, but they never made it to the top like the emperor did. The masters of this world? What do you know about them? The solitary falcon started taking interest in Jun Moxie's words once again. The world only believes in the 8 grand masters. The first-ranked master is untouchable, Yun Chen. People say that he walks with level 9 Xian beasts by his side. It is said that he reached the peak of Spirit Xian several years ago. They say that he's capable of turning the entire world upside down on his own. Yes. The solitary falcon nodded slowly. His Royal Highness and Old Song had also heard about this man's name, and knew what he was capable of. Yun Chen was practically a legend. An immortal legend. The second isn't as strong, but is still a legend in his own merit. Li Ju Tian. People say that he's indifferent to everything, and only acts according to his own fancies. But his Xian Qi is already at the peak of the world, and I believe that no one can question that fact. The third should be Blizzard Silver City's overlord, Han Feng Shui. The moment Jun Moxie mentioned his name, a wave of emotion rippled across the solitary falcon's face. The fourth is Mo Wentian. Jun Moxie's eyes were constantly scanning everyone's reactions secretly. This master is said to belong to the Tianxiang Empire. Fifth would be the cold-blooded Li Wu Bei. The sixth is the imperial teacher of the Shen Xie Empire. It is said that he's a mortal enemy of Mo Wentian's, and that they would do anything to kill the other. This person is also rumored to be inside the Tianxiang city at the moment. Jun Moxie smiled coldly. The seventh Grand Master chooses to live in seclusion perennially. Meng Hongchen. As for the eighth, Jun Moxie smiled calmly. That's difficult to conclude. What's so difficult to conclude? The solitary falcon raised his eyebrows and coldly looked at Jun Moxie. It's nothing more than a name. Is it really that difficult to say it? The eighth position is tied in the eyes of the world between two people. Jun Moxie smiled in a mysterious manner. The savannah's solitary falcon and Kuang Feng's Feng Wanyun are both considered to be rank 8. It is said that they tried to sort this out by the means of a battle almost half a lifetime ago, but their battle bore no result. Therefore, the 8th spot is shared by the two of them. What difference does it make if there was a winner or not? That Feng Wanyun doesn't deserve his reputation. He's nothing in front of the solitary falcon. The solitary falcon snorted. I've also heard the same before. I've heard that the solitary falcon often goes off to snow-covered mountain peaks alone in order to improve his martial skills. In fact, it is said that he trains with hundreds and thousands of bald eagles. If this rumor is true, then the solitary falcon is sure to be a tough man. Jun Moxie said this with a look of worship on his face. If such is the case, then the solitary falcon is definitely superior to Feng Wanyun. The solitary falcon couldn't help feeling a sense of greatness. I didn't think that a young man like you would actually know so much about the 8 Grand Masters of the world. I guess you're more knowledgeable than I imagined. Old song and the prince simply didn't get it. Everyone knows about this. There's nothing great about this. This doesn't exactly qualify as some great knowledge. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 162. The competition had already begun. Old song and the prince simply didn't get it. Everyone knows about this. There's nothing great about this. This doesn't exactly qualify as some great knowledge. Okay. The solitary falcon's feats about fighting bald eagles in the snowy peaks for years. And that too alone is quite amazing. But then Feng Wanyun is also renowned for wiping out entire wolf packs on his own. That's almost as good the solitary falcon's accomplishments. So how's his reputation false? But since these two men were quite involved in their discussion and were convinced about the rankings, neither of the other two objected. In addition to the 8 great masters of the world, there's also the king of all killers, Chu Chi Hun. Jun Moxie couldn't help pondering over Yang Mo's words. How good must he be to earn the title of the king of all killers? Is he even stronger than I used to be in my previous life? Really, now I'm getting very curious. Just the thought of this ignited a war cry in Jun Moxie's heart. Just the way there can't be 2 tigers on the same hill. There can't be 2 leaders in the same industry. Even more so in the assassination business. By the virtue of being the uncrowned king of assassins in his previous life, Jun Moxie's ego simply couldn't tolerate this competition. At this moment, Jun Moxie suddenly realized that there would be a battle between Chu Chi Hun and himself one day. I'm afraid that there will be a battle soon or later. It's fated. Inevitable. Kid. Even though I won't question your knowledge, you must know that I won't agree with you no matter how much you insist. Even though the solitary falcon's words were challenging in nature, he still managed to say it in a very cool and calm manner. I still don't agree with the explanation. I agree that the solitary falcon has fought bald eagles atop the snowy peaks for years. But why is that enough to make him better than the others? Jun Moxie sighed and said, everyone knows that the eagles around the peak of the snowy mountains aren't normal vultures. They are xian beasts. Although they aren't high-grade xian beasts, but thousands of them make up for the lack of quality with sheer quantity. We all know that fighting is one of the best ways to improve xian qi. Plus the biting cold of the mountains also tends to have a very mysterious effect on xian qi. And, if one is able to beat so many vultures, then their combat experience obviously increases many-fold. Furthermore, the flight trajectories and attack action of these vultures can be very unpredictable, which teaches a practitioner several new styles. The solitary falcon smiled and nodded to indicate his agreement. He has an excellent perception, yes. That's very true, the solitary falcon added with a smug look on his face, which ignited a strong impulse to spit on it within Jun Moxie's heart. Just look at that expression on his face. You may be a great warrior, but have you ever heard the term modesty? Don't tell me that, you're the solitary falcon. You do have a look of mystery about you. Jun Moxie suddenly realized one simple truth: an ordinary man or an official, rogue or an expert, we're all just wearing masks. And that's what protects us and comforts us in front of strangers. Although the solitary falcon's practice methods are the fastest methods to temper xian qi, but they are also amongst of the most dangerous ones. And for this reason, the solitary falcon is worthy of being a great master. Jun Moxie was somehow holding back the strong desire to vomit as he continued to praise the man. He knew that it was necessary to lay the groundwork for his victory, and it would come at the cost of suffering through this. The solitary falcon was obviously very pleased to know that his efforts are winning recognition from some people, but was simultaneously unhappy to see that some others were looking at his methods disdainfully. But Jun Moxie stopped before it started to sound like he was overdoing it, and then quickly took a sharp turn. Since this is a well-known shortcut, don't you think that others would have also tried this? Do you actually believe that a method which has been known since the ancient times was only attempted by just one person? But still, only one man was able to become one of the 8 great masters, and the others are unheard of? What does this reflect? The solitary falcon's entire body immediately straightened up. That they're dead. The thought of all the bones buried in the snow atop the snowy peaks ignited a sense of pity in his heart. But mostly it made him feel proud about his accomplishments. The old man is right. Jun Moxie wantonly continued to praise. The shortcut is never equivalent to the easier methods. All those men were either buried in the snow, or became food for those vultures. They certainly found the right direction, and also chose the right method. In fact, they were extremely dedicated. I'd even go as far as saying that they were even more persistent than the solitary falcon because they continued to try till the time of their deaths. But the world only knows the solitary falcon's name, and no one knows who those other guys were. They all took the same approach as the solitary falcon, but we still haven't heard of any of their names. There is only reason behind it: the solitary falcon succeeded, and they failed. It's simple. Jun Moxie smiled. The anecdotes of the so-called successful people tend to turn into inspirational stories for the rest of the world. Not because of the story itself, but because they eventually succeeded. The men who failed took on the same tasks, and even their experiences could be transformed into stories, and their stories would actually be even more epic. Shocking. Heart-wrenching. But they wouldn't inspire anyone because in the end they failed and found themselves buried in the ground. Anyone can have a story. And anyone can become a legend. But there must be a prerequisite: you have to succeed. Wealth provides physical comfort, whereas poverty provides spiritual comforts. But we only hear about the rich because they worked their way out of poverty, whereas the poor remained stuck in their miseries. Jun Moxie had said too much in just one breath, so naturally his mouth fell a bit dry. He grabbed the teapot and poured himself a drink, and then drank it. However, no one perceived his actions to be rude since everyone was busy pondering over the profound meaning of his words. All I'm trying to say is, even though Old Song worked very hard and was extremely persistent, but his wine has only ever qualified to be a good quality wine in the eyes of ordinary men, and not necessarily the best one, because he still hasn't managed to achieve what the solitary falcon has: success. Jun Moxie had cleverly drawn this big circle back in Old Song's direction. Jun Moxie had doubted the black-robed man's identity from the beginning. Jun Moxie's suspicion had escalated at the time when he exposed Old Song's true Xian rank. The entire talk about the 8 great masters was just a test to see if he defended the solitary falcon, which he did. And his sharp reaction to his nemesis's praise made it a little too obvious. He is the solitary falcon. It's obvious now. I think even Old Song and the old man know it now, but if they still can't see it, then it's better to beat myself to death with a pillow than explaining it to them in detail. But the best thing was that since Jun Moxie had identified his real identity despite the fact that he was trying to conceal it, it could now be used without him ever realizing about it. This kid is very pleasant to listen to. It is, as you said, good or bad. We'll only find out after we taste the wines. Old Song was obviously a bit gloomy now. If we start this contest now, then he'll win even if our wines are similar in quality. First he comes late, then he offends everyone, and then rambles incoherently to force his fallacious logic. Although he does have a point. Even though no one had said it, but the contest had already begun at the time when Old Song narrated the background story of his wine. Even though Jun Moxie had only played around with words, but he managed to obliterate whatever slight advantage Old Song had gained early on. This was all a part of the competition. But the biggest advantage that Jun Moxie had managed to exploit was the solitary falcon. Turbulent winds were rising in the Tianxiang city, and the solitary falcon could be used to turn the tables any time. Jun Moxie had been intending on using him to do just that, and had already started laying the groundwork. Yes, good. Now let's start the wine tasting. Soon we'll know which wine is better. The man from royalty was obviously calmer than Old Song and the solitary falcon. After all, he was a member of the royal family, and hence had always been associated with different circles as compared to the other 2 men. Admiration and worship have always been 2 mutually exclusive terms. The solitary falcon might be a great warrior, but it wasn't enough to compete with the emperor of an empire. If someone tried to assassinate him, then the unprepared master would be likely to fall prey and may not be able to escape his death. However, a king's legacy would continue to live on long after he's gone. Yes, perseverance may not necessarily pave the way for success, but you need to be persistent in order to be successful. The solitary falcon closed his eyes and considered his words as he slowly stated them. Your words make me feel as if there's no real need to admire any man. Even though Jun Moxie disagreed inwardly, outwardly his tongue hummed a different tune altogether. Yes, we only need to understand our goals clearly, and then move forward step by step. We shouldn't pay any heed to the failures of our predecessors, or worry whether the succeeding generation will be able to catch up or not. We should only be concerned about our path to climbing the peak, not of some else's. Well said, the solitary falcon laughed. We should only be concerned about our path to climbing the peak, not of some else's. This sentence demands a drink. Jun Moxie smiled and pointed his hands towards Old Song to indicate that he should go first. This action startled everyone present. As far as tasting food items is concerned, the first impression is always the hardest to beat. Therefore, it is most important to be the first. Else, even if both items taste the same, the first one will undoubtedly be proclaimed the winner. Is he really that confident? Jun Moxie's actions had raised a big question in everyone's mind. Old Song didn't hesitate, and immediately grabbed 4 glasses, and quickly and quietly placed them in front of everyone with just one wave of his hand. The free-flowing, natural and smooth movement of the master earned him the admiration of Yang Mo, which clearly reflected in the boy's eyes. Then, he opened the cork of the wine flask, and the aroma of the wine's flavor instantly the room's atmosphere. The solitary falcon and the prince couldn't refrain from closing their eyes, or inhaling the scent. The 2 wine lovers had tasted all kinds of wine over the course of their life, but neither man had ever smelt such an exotic and strong flavor before. Naturally, they couldn't suppress their strong desire to taste it. They hadn't even tasted the wine yet, but were already convinced that they had never tasted anything better. This is definitely better than anything I've ever tasted. The solitary falcon judged from the aroma. This wine is indeed the work of a true master. I think that only 1 or 2 masters are capable of fermenting anything even close to this. Jun Moxie's brows wrinkled. Although this wine seems rich and mellow, but the smell is obviously too strong. It's almost like an expensive perfume. It's useful to attract others by spraying just a little on the body. But if the flask breaks, then it will just destroy one's nose. What a cliché. Song Shang clutched the jar in both his hands with a solemn and sacred look in his eyes. A blue light flashed from his hands as the wine sprayed into the air and flew into the wine glass, filling it straight to the top. Not even a single drop fell out of the cup. And then the second glass. All the 4 glasses were full in a matter of moments. The wine created a magnificent and fragrant rainbow as the wine continued to flow through the air. But not even half a drop fell out of the glasses. Please. Old Song raised his hands and invited everyone to drink, but didn't touch his own cup. Please subscribe to this channel, so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 163. Pushing it to the limit. Song Shang had contested and won several wine-making contests over the span of his life, and so he was obviously not short on confidence. In fact, he would usually remain calm even if he was contesting against hundreds of people at once. His confidence in his ability had always been absolute. Therefore, he had always been sure that no one is capable of beating his wine's quality. No one can beat me. However, this time Song Shang found himself in a very different situation. He was nervous. Unable to understand the reason behind this nervousness was making him even more uncomfortable. On top of that, the pressure he was being subjected to was coming from by a teenager. He slanted his eyes and glanced at the 2 jars which Jun Moxie had brought with him. Is his wine actually better than mine? Although this wine-making contest was the most insignificant one that he had ever participated in, but the quality of the wine he was producing was unprecedented. Even though there were only 2 judges for this contest, but one of them was the king's brother, and the other was amongst the finest and most powerful experts in the Xian continent. And then, the only spectator was a prince. As for the stake of this bet, that too was unprecedented. Song Shang wasn't just betting his reputation on it. He was also gambling with his freedom. If I lose, then I'm willing to accept him as my master. Since this sentence had been spoken in the presence of a prince, it was as solid as a contract. This is ridiculous. I'm a renowned winemaker. He's nothing in front of me. I'm just nervous because I've put up my best wine for this contest, and these guys will finish it all. But then I can't really say no to these guys then, can I? Offending a prince isn't the best way to seek refuge in his country. Even though he was unaware of the mysterious expert's true identity, he knew that the man too wasn't to be offended under any circumstances. Therefore, even though this was only a small bet, Song Shang had still somehow landed himself on sheer cliffs and precipitous rock faces. Since he had already decided to ride a tiger, it was hard to get off now. Fighting with his back against the river was the only option left. Amazing wine. The prince raised the glass to his mouth and took his first sip. Then, he allowed the wine to roll in his mouth for a while, absorbing the flavor and smell, and then swallowed it down. He gently closed his eyes and enjoyed the aftertaste of the wine as it brought a wonderful feeling along with it. I've had a lot of wines in my life, but this wine is something different and special. I really don't think that I've ever had something this special. I really need to drink more of this. The solitary falcon's face was clearly reflecting the same feeling. No wonder Song Shang was so confident about his wine. He only staked his life on it since he knew that his wine is extraordinary. Not even the imperial winemaker's wine is capable of overshadowing his work. In fact, it's not even fair to mention the two wines in the same breath. Jun Moxie smiled as he gently started shaking the wine glass. The originally clear wine started getting blurry, and then a few bubbles started to bubble up. Upon a closer look, it was obvious that the originally clear wine was now becoming slightly turbid. This isn't professional enough. Jun Moxie shook his head and sighed. Impurities in wines have always been a taboo. Song Shang almost choked while his eyes widened in shock. His years of mental and physical effort, skill, determination, dedication, and pains had actually been called unprofessional by a kid. Is this kid just ignorant? Or is this his arrogance? Both the judges had already finished their cups, and even though they hadn't asked for more, it was evident that their fingertips were itching to move towards the flask for more. It was obvious that they were eagerly waiting for the contest to end, so they could just announce Song Shang as the winner and then devour the rest of his wine. Little brother, we should taste your wine as well now. This competition has been very interesting from the beginning, and this wine alone has been worthy of making this trip. The Royal Highness smiled gently as his remark made it rather obvious that he was already expecting Old Song to be the winner. In fact, he had been looking at Old Song's wine from the corner of his eyes ever since he had tasted it. The prince's intentions seemed rather obvious. After I declare Old Song as the winner, I will ask him to ditch the man in black, and then give these 2 wine jars to me as a gift. But I'll have to keep a close eye on this man. If he steals this wine, then I won't get to drink it again. Anyway, Old Song said that these 2 flasks were the last of it. As for the outcome of this contest, the result is rather obvious now. Song Shang's wine has always been the best in the city, and this particular wine is even rarer and better than anything he's ever produced before. The solitary falcon had been maintaining his calm and composure throughout so far, and even though the prince couldn't read his mind, Jun Moxie could tell that the solitary falcon and the prince were both thinking the same thing. It's too early to say anything right now. The outcome of this battle should only be decided once both the wines have had their chance. Jun Moxie leaned over and picked up wine jar and slapped the cork off in one movement. Bang! The 3 pair of eyes flinched at the same time. Even Yang Imo stared at Jun Moxie with a look of nervousness on his face. Ha! The three men exclaimed at the same time. The smell hasn't changed even one bit, there's absolutely nothing seductive about its fragrance. Whenever the seal to a wine jar is opened, the aroma of the wine pours out of it. But how could there be no scent? What is this kid up to? The three men couldn't stop their faces from turning red initially. But a closer look revealed that even though Jun Moxie had opened the seal, there was still a thin layer of oil-soaked paper which was tightly wrapped around the jar, which was probably blocking its scent. The faces of the three men reddened once again since Jun Moxie was unwrapping this oil-soaked paper at a very slow pace. He was practically teasing their desires. The oil-soaked paper was finally removed, but there was still no scent. The eyes of the three people simultaneously opened up wide in surprise. Wait, is that a real layer of animal skin under that oil-soaked paper? It seems that the animal skin actually belonged to a level 6 Xian beast. But then the three of them noticed something new again. There's a thick layer of orange wood under the animal skin. That's the real reason why there's no odor. Orange wood doesn't have any smell of its own, but it's capable of isolating any kind of smell. No wonder we haven't been able to smell anything so far. But wait, his wine jar was already smaller than the usual size. And now this just means that the real size of his jar is actually half of its originally perceived size. This is way too much, less. And now what? Jun Moxie's hands stopped at the critical moment. And then he suddenly stood up and slowly took 2 steps back. Then, he opened his arms wide and stretched his chest. He took a deep breath, hummed a few times, then placed his hands on his hips and revolved his waist around a few times. Then he twisted his buttocks a bit, and then swung his arms around, and then started stretching and loosening up his neck a bit. Then, he crisscrossed his fingers, and started cracking them all, one by one. His Royal Highness Song Shang and the solitary falcon were all staring at him dumbstruck. The three men had the same impulse guiding their hearts at the moment. Don't waste your energy in stretching your neck. Let me twist it for you. I will certainly twist it like it's never been twisted before. Little Yang Imo wanted to ask Jun Moxie if he was feeling alright, perhaps out of innocence. Once Jun Moxie was done stretching his entire body, he strode forward with cat-like elegance, and removed the orange wood covering his wine without sparing any effort for the task. And then threw it down to his feet with a bang. The sound of the orange wood's fall broke the silence of the room, and all three men raised their eyebrows provocatively. Jun Moxie's hands were still blocking the opening of the flask, which was still prohibiting the wine's aroma from spreading into the atmosphere. The hearts of the three men were itching. Just open the forsaken bottle now. As the three men continued to stare at him with a look of indignation on their faces, Jun Moxie looked down at his wine flask affectionately, and stated in a duck-like voice, "Ah. Before you drink, smell it. The flavor of its scent is 10 times more intoxicating than anything else." D*MNU, the three men cursed in unison. Even the usually calm and collected solitary falcon was no exception. Jun Moxie had obviously tested everyone's patience and had pushed it to the limit by now. But then, the three people's cursing ceased in a flash, while the anger on their faces froze in its place. Because at that exact moment, Jun Moxie removed his hand, and allowed the aroma of the wine to infuse with the air. An unspeakably wondrous flavor filled the entire room, suppressing their objections, almost as if a dominant warrior had stepped into a room full of cowards. Perhaps a better description would be, the fragrance spread through the room like moonlight from a shiny night sky, and covered every nook and corner of the room. This is the smell of a transcending dream. This fragrance isn't from the human world. It's from a land of wonders. No, not even that. Even a land of wonders isn't capable of producing such an amazing aroma. The three men felt as if the wine's aroma was the seventh heaven lingering over their heads, and a strong desire to step into its bliss was inciting them to float and rise upwards. And upwards, and upwards. What kind of a wine is this? Is it really possible for a wine from this world to produce such intoxicating aroma? I'm too moved. Jun Moxie had already poured the wine into 4 cups by the time the 3 men recovered. The wine's amber color felt quite magical in the jade shade glass. Before you drink, smell it. The flavor of its scent is 10 times more intoxicating than anything else. The prince got up, having already forgotten his manners. He roared in a trembling voice as tears streamed his cheeks, far more than 10 ah. Song Shang picked up his glass with tears in his eyes. He held the glass so carefully that it almost felt as if he was trying to hold on to a priceless treasure. He stared at the wine for a long time, almost as if he was unwilling to drink it. Not because he was afraid of losing the contest, he was afraid that the wine may not be anything more than a fragrance. And drinking it would sour his current blissful state. Just the mere smell of the wine had sent the 3 men into a dream-like state, and neither of them wanted to wake up from this beautiful dream. Please subscribe to this channel, so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 164. Sky Xian Apprentice. The solitary falcon had somehow been able to maintain his usual expressionless look, along with his composure, but still couldn't stop his face from blushing. His eyes flashed a spark of expectation as he grabbed his glass and slowly raised it to his mouth. He hesitated for a second, and then drained the cup in one gulp. He clearly felt the liquid as the wine came in contact with his throat, and could even feel his own xian qi stirring up inside his body. As he felt the wine reaching his stomach, he realized that he still hadn't finished it all, which is why he drained the rest of it down in his second gulp. The solitary falcon was just beginning to enjoy the aroma of the wine even more when he suddenly felt a very intense and extreme sense of burning inside his body, almost as if his limbs, all his blood vessels, and all his meridians were on fire. Suddenly he felt as if his whole body had been set on fire. His body hair were erect, and even his xian qi wasn't listening to his commands anymore. The flame which was smoldering inside his body felt strong enough to give him power to beat any man in this moment, even Yun Bei Chen. Great wine! This is the best wine in this world. The solitary falcon tried very hard to suppress his words, but was unable to. Even though this low-sounding roar came from deep within his throat, the excitement in his voice was evident. This man is the god of wine. The prince also gulped his wine down, and then suddenly started staring foolishly at everyone. He got up a while later, walked around in a circle, almost as if he's sleepwalking, and then returned to his seat. He kept his head lowered for a while, continuously staring at his glass of wine the entire time, after which he mumbled with tears in his eyes, "Today I know the truth behind my life, I've lived." Then he suddenly jumped up and extended his arms, almost as if he wanted to scream out, but was unable to. So he reseated himself and moaned, "Great wine, ah." Song Shang couldn't suppress his body's trembling as he held the glass, still unwilling to drink it. After seeing the solitary falcon and the prince's reactions, he had already realized that he had lost the contest. He had lost without any doubt. But at this time, especially at this moment, he was very excited despite his loss, and elated despite his defeat. Since his best work had been beaten, he had no regrets. Now he just wanted to experience the taste of this wine for himself. At this moment, Song Shang wasn't taking this defeat to his heart. Like a pilgrim on a holy trail, he just wanted to experience the supreme power. As he drank, Song Shang felt his soul dance and sing. He could feel every inch of his muscles, each meridian of his body, and their trembling. Soon enough, Song Shang's eyes started to tear while his throat started to whimper. As his tears started to fall into his cup, his eyes became even more watery. A little while later, his entire body started to tremble. And then he suddenly lowered his face to the table and completely broke down and burst into tears. Since I've had the good fortune of drinking this wine today, my life will now be devoid of all regrets. I've had the opportunity to drink such a divine drink today. I will even accept my death without any complaints. Old Song punched, and punched, and punched the table, and then banged and banged, and banged his head against the table as he pulled his hair out while crying uncontrollably. I've spent my entire life living like a dog, ah. Jun Moxie was left flabbergasted. Goosebumps covered his entire body as he watched the horrifying scene. He had seen people cry before. He had seen men cry before. But Jun Moxie had never seen anyone cry like this before. Moreover, this man was at least 50 years old. On top of that, this man was a Sky Xian expert and a famed assassin. And now he was crying uncontrollably over a glass of wine. Is this simply because of this one glass of wine? Jun Moxie was completely baffled. The hitman Jun had always underestimated the power of wine. The art of making wine had undergone thousands and thousands of years of evolution. Countless people had gone insane in search of methods for perfecting the art of making wine. This art had been passed down from generation to generation, and those methods had undergone several changes with each passing generation. Since Jun Moxie had the finalized methods on his fingertips, he had always assumed winemaking to be an easy task. But he had always ignored that he was standing on top of thousands and thousands of years of cultural and methodical evolution. He was standing on top of the life works of thousands of geniuses. To participate in a contest with a modern world method of making wine in an ancient setting would be like standing as tall as the Mount Everest in front of a normal human. He had never realized that the methods he had used to ferment this wine had been made available to him due to the research and hard work of countless people who had devoted their entire lives to the art of making wine. And in that ancient world, one such devoted man had just tasted a modern and refined wine. The impact was simply unspeakable. Old Song Xianqi had already reached the Sky Xian realm, which ranked him amongst some of the most powerful individuals in this world, and practically made him untouchable in the eyes of the common man. But this very man had always upheld, making wine is my best attribute. Had he invested the same amount of energy and devotion to his martial training, then his martial achievements would have crossed all barriers. Old Song's heart was experiencing a storm of emotions, but his emotions were still comforting him in a way. On one hand, his arrogance, pride and confidence on being the best winemaker in world had been shattered. But on the other hand, he had suddenly found a wine which was superior to his best product by a very huge margin. It was almost unfathomable to imagine Old Song's shock. Jun Moxie had just transformed into a man beyond compare in his eyes, almost as if he was an incarnation of the god of wine himself. Oh heavens! This world actually has such a wine. And there's a man in this world who can actually make such wine. If he isn't the god of wine, then what is he? From being a proud and confident man, he had been transformed into a beaten one. This was equivalent to the defeat of his entire life's persistence. The collapse of life's support and driving force. The pub had gone completely quiet, and remained that way for a while. The prince was the first one to speak, this wine-making contest of today's. His voice still harbored a lingering taste of excitement. My wine is nothing compared to this youngster's wine. He's right, my wine is rubbish. My wine has no merit in front of his. There's absolutely no competition, not even one shred of it. I Song Shang have traveled the entire world, and I've never tasted anything this divine. Song Shang's voice seemed extremely excited. I Song Shang concede. Then he stood up as his eyes flashed a trace of frenzy, and walked towards Jun Moxie. Then, he knelt down on both his knees, and lowered his head to the ground with a thud. Master, please accept your apprentice's respect. Jun Moxie hastily stood up. This. His Royal Highness and the solitary falcon looked at each other dumbstruck. It was a while before the solitary falcon was able to find his words. Old Song has accepted you as his master. Little brother. Your wine is peerless. But don't disgrace him. Don't humiliate him. The final judgment had been passed. Jun Moxie remained lost in his thoughts for a long while before he finally smiled, and said, yes. In that case. Song Shang. Get up. I accept you. What is going on? Who says the sky cannot fall? The prince had always taken these words as a joke, but watching Song Shang, a dignified Sky Xian expert, one of the top assassins of the world, transforming into a disciple of an ordinary youngster was no joke. Becoming an apprentice is a life-changing decision. There are 5 cardinal relations in our way of life: parents and child, master and disciple, husband and wife, elder and younger siblings, and friends. Even though master and disciple relationship isn't the first priority, but it's the most important one. A master is more important than a parent. Parents only shape one's body, but it's one's master that guides one to success in life. Given Song Shang's identity and status, how can he ever even think of becoming a disciple to this lowly and unknown kid? The prince had obviously underestimated Old Song's obsession with the art of winemaking. Knowledge knows no age. As far as Old Song was concerned, this was his path to enlightenment. Even Jun Moxie was a little surprised, and was still pondering. In case Old Song goes back on his word, then he could betray me anytime. I never really thought that he would. But the hitman Jun wasn't the kind to go back on his word. Letting go of a Sky Xian apprentice would obviously be a very foolish decision. Even though he only intends to learn the art of winemaking from me, but I can never be sure of trusting him given his identity of being a Sky Xian expert. He is mysterious, and may be backed by a powerful force. So if he becomes my subordinate, will I truly be able to control him? Jun Moxie was a bit excited at the thought, but then he suddenly woke up to the responsibility of being a teacher, and realized that he will now be responsible for his disciples' education. A superficial halo emerged within his mind, which told him to shoulder his responsibility. Old Song, do you know why you lost? Jun Moxie suddenly felt the urge to touch his beard, which would have made him look more respectable in appearance, but then suddenly realized that he was only 16, and obviously didn't have one. Left with no other option, he stopped his hand from going upwards and redirected it to scratch his legs instead. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 165. Partnership with the Prince. Master's wine is the best in the world. This disciple obviously never stood a chance against Master's unrivaled expertise, and the disciple conceives it in heart and admits it in words. Song Shang's tone was full of respect. Even though Song Shang was far more accomplished than his young master, He didn't feel even the slightest of hesitation in talking to his master with humility, since he was nothing in front of his master in terms of wine-making abilities. In fact, his voice even harbored a strong sense of excitement and privilege with regard to his new status. You can go on and on about my skill and the superiority of my wine, but you'll always be wrong. You're mistaken from the start. Jun Moxie stated unceremoniously, you earlier stated that you fermented this wine almost a decade ago, at the peak of your skills, and it's the best wine in the world. It sounded like you were very pleased with your work, and that's the reason which blocked your future progress. And if you continue to believe in that, then it will also ruin any chances of progress in the future. The moment you started believing that these 2 jars of wine were the best in the world, you lost. To yourself. You lost because you started to believe that you couldn't be beaten. Song Shang's forehead started to sweat the moment he heard this remark. Yes. Master is right. Ever since I produced this wine a decade ago, I haven't made any progress. Not even the slightest bit. I've lived every day believing that no one can beat me. I got complacent. I had never anticipated that I would ever lose in this manner. It's almost like martial training. If a person says, I entered into Earth Xian 3 years ago, then at this rate I will make it to the Sky Xian sooner or later. Then this person is unlikely to ever make it to the Sky Xian realm till the end of his days, let alone any higher. But the family of such people always puts pressure on them to improve their Xian Qi as fast as possible, which is the reason they rarely ever lax. But if their practice slows down, then even they wouldn't be able to move forward. Winemaking, however, is completely different. There's no pressure on you. And you simply weren't persistent enough. Had you been persistent, then even if you had still lost today, you wouldn't have lost by such a huge margin. Jun Moxie stated in an earnest tone, so persistence is the key. Song Shang had already accepted Jun Moxie as his master, and was willing to take his every word as a command. But the solitary falcon and the prince were still not convinced of this situation. This guy just gave us some very eloquent examples to prove that persistence and devotion aren't that important. And he has actually overturned his previous conclusion in the blink of an eye. He's turning colors faster than one can turn the page of a book. He's such a pretentious folk. But then their eyes resettled onto Jun Moxie's 2 wine jars, and they both swallowed a mouthful of saliva down their throats. A wine fermented with the most ordinary of raw products can also be the best wine in the world. In fact, that's real wine. Jun Moxie leisurely stated, just as in the world of martial arts, the most basic of moves are capable of producing the maximum amount of power, and can take a man to the peak of the world. The solitary falcon suddenly stared at Jun Moxie as he stated this sentence. A low-level martial artist may not have been able to understand the profound meaning behind this sentence, but to man of his excellence, this sentence was nothing short of enlightening. Punch. What is the most powerful kind of punch in the world? It's the most ordinary one, the tiger fist punch, and it's able to produce the most powerful effect. Even if one wraps all kinds of fancy flowers around their punch and hits the enemy, then the punch still won't be able to do the same amount of damage which a properly executed and concentrated basic one can. This is basic law of martial arts. In a duel between 2 experts, the most basic of moves often decide the victor. The tiger fist undoubtedly focuses on strength, and is considered to be the king of all strokes. But even then it has a prerequisite: you have to hit the other party, and the simplest of moves is the solution to get away from it: agility. It seemed as if the solitary eagle had just been freed from his shackles, and would almost jump out at any moment. If he was able to get more clarity on this thought, then he could surely progress further. And progress a lot further. But he was still helpless since he couldn't really get the idea formulated properly in his head at the moment. and was busy thinking over it, which was evident from the frown on his face. Unintentionally or intentionally, this one sentence of Jun Moxie's had brought a great expert on the fringes of a great breakthrough. While the solitary falcon was absorbed in his thoughts, the prince was simply unable to wait any longer. Little brother. This wine. Ah. How much? It's. Well, I already addressed that earlier. It's like I said. This wine is 11,000 taels of silver per jar. Do you still think that it isn't worth it? Jun Moxie quietly tossed the bait. Not at all. The prince hadn't even opened his mouth yet. But Old Song simply couldn't resist the urge. This wine is a rarity in this human world. Measuring its value in gold and silver is a profanity to the wine's quality. Forget about 11,000 silver. Even 11,000 gold isn't enough to purchase this wine. In his opinion, this wine was no longer just wine. It was an art, a masterpiece. Priceless. A priceless treasure. It is indeed worth it in my opinion as well. This wine is indeed 100 times better than Old Song's wine. The prince promptly replied back. Looked at Jun Moxie and sighed, although I'm afraid that I won't be able to buy too much of it. Difficult to buy too much? It's practically impossible, although the prince made sure that he didn't say it like it really was. If that's the case, then I guess I shouldn't be selling it directly, and I should rather go in for only auctioning it instead. Perhaps I could even fetch a higher price. Jun Moxie smiled as he tacitly put forth his idea. The three men went silent for a while as they pondered over his idea, and understood his intention soon enough. They could clearly understand the potential behind his idea. If you do auction it, when will you auction it? And where will you auction it? The prince simply couldn't wait to ask this question. Where can I taste a wine like this one once more? And when can I buy it? The price is secondary. Song Shang will convey that to you since he will be involved in this auction as well. Jun Moxie was a bit worried about trusting Old Song in other matters. But when it came to wine, he was 100% sure about the man. Song Shang could betray anyone, but he could never betray wine. Jun Moxie was confident about this. That's great, the prince clapped his hands in excitement. In fact, if you face any difficulty, then this old man can even help you as long as you're conducting the auction within the city, but if you conduct the auction outside the city, then I won't be able to help you out much. If he auctions it here, then I could somehow buy some of it. Or at least curry a favor with the winner and drink some. I'll make the official introductions. Master, this man is the Emperor's brother, Yang Huai. He is the Emperor's only sibling. Although Old Song's tone was very respectful, he still mentioned this fact right after the prince mentioned that he may not be able to afford this wine too often, which was obviously rather embarrassing considering that he was a prince. The Emperor's brother. Even though Jun Moxie had already guessed long back that this man was quite influential, but he still wasn't expecting him to be the Tianxiang Empire's emperor's only brother. Even though he was slightly surprised, he immediately regained his composure. Apologizes for any disrespect. Everyone was expecting him to be shocked, and even lower his head in worship. After all, he was no more than a mere commoner in the eyes of these three men, a proud and talented youngster at best. How such a lowly man able to keep his composure in front of a prince? He didn't even lower his head in submission like the common people usually do. In fact, this kid's eyes didn't even flinch for 1 second. The prince obviously wanted to express his thoughts but decided to keep his mouth shut instead. He could tell that this kid may not be the most respectful of people around. They were all completely unaware that the boy in front didn't care about any prince or royalty owing to previous life's adventures. Moreover, they were also unaware of the immoral behavior he had exhibited in front of the second prince just a few days ago. If the prince hadn't already taken a shine to Jun Moxie's personality, then he would certainly have felt insulted by his conduct, and wouldn't have stayed to drink his wine either, and could have even, if necessary, then I will be very happy to cooperate with the prince. Jun Moxie flashed a faint smile as he stated his words in a polite manner. It was very evident from his tone and choice of words that he would only cooperate with the prince if it was deemed necessary. Else he, whichever suits you best. The prince wasn't interested in pestering him about it, and laughed as he squinted his eyes. Although I can't afford this wine at the moment, but I certainly cannot allow this wine to get buried either. Jun Moxie's obvious rejection had added more oil to the flame of his interest. I don't know if the old man would be interested, but I'm willing to sell 1 share in this wine for every 2 million silver taels. Even if the old man wishes to pass these shares on to his next of kin, this little brother would be willing to agree. This remark came as a bit of a surprise to everyone since Jun Moxie referred to the prince as old man, despite being well aware of his true identity. Moreover, the offer to sell the rights to his wine at 2 million silver taels per share was an obvious indication of his optimistic calculation about his wine's prospects. This old man is almost 50 years old now, and I only have 1 daughter and 1 son. His Royal Highness smiled. My daughter is old enough to be married, and I hope that I can find a suitable family for her, and relieve the burden of her future from my shoulders. As for my son, he doesn't wish to follow in his father's footsteps, and therefore I've already started making the preparation for the rainy days ahead, and I hope that he isn't as helpless as his old man someday. Pin drop silence. The previous emperor had 2 sons, Crown Prince Yang Haoyu and the second prince, Yang Huainong. Yang Huayu had always been ambitious, tactical, military-oriented, political-minded, and had always taken a very keen interest in the overall governing on the empire. Yang Huainong had never participated in any of it, and had always maintained a low-key profile, because he knew that no matter how hard to strive, he'd never be able to surpass his elder brother's skills. He obviously had no intention of destroying himself by competing in vain. So basically, the second prince had gradually withdrawn himself from the power chase right from the start. His lack of enthusiasm for power coupled with his long-lasting distance from the empire's affairs had brought him to the point where he didn't even care about its future. But now the emperor was looking for his next successor, and the prince who had always been indifferent had started thinking about the future of his children, and was even willing to seek assistance from outside the royalty. This can mean only one thing: he is competing against his own 3 nephews, and he feels that the empire might split, leaving him with nothing. Why else would a prince plot against the monarchy in order to secure the future of his children? Please subscribe to this channel, so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 166. Assassins. 1 million taels instead of 2 for 1 share. Jun Moxie exposed a meaningful smile. I'm only giving you this bargain because I like you. He's offering the emperor's brother a share which is worth 1 million taels per share, and is actually calling it a favor? Jun Moxie lowered his line of sight to look at young Yang Mo and said, "Little girl, you're a shareholder in my wine from now on. You and I are partners now." "I'm a man," the boy screamed back so furiously that it almost felt as if he was gearing up to bite his tormentor. We'll discuss more on this topic later. Ladies and gentlemen, Song Shang will convey the details of the auction to you later, as and when they are decided. But for now, I need to head back home. Jun Moxie wisely chose to hurry back home. The identity of an emperor's brother, and his plan to secure the future of his children was not just a very serious matter, but also a very sensitive one, which was appropriately conveyed by Prince Yang Huainong in one sentence. It was evident from his choice of words that any deviation from his instructions would result in a torrent of his influence. Even a Sky Xian expert like Song Shang recoiled from the threat, let alone Jun Moxie. Of course, this wasn't enough to scare an expert of the solitary falcon standard, obviously. The man's strength had already surpassed the influence of a prince. However, the prince's words were enough to shake any man alive. Apart from a man of the solitary falcon's stature, of course. In fact, even Jun Moxie didn't really care much about the prince, and was only concerned with his true new partner, young Yang Mo. I might like you, prince, but when the time comes, I'll only care about this kid's life, not your insignificant one. Master, do you wish for your disciple to stay here? Even though Song Shang had asked this question in a normal tone, it was obvious from the gleam in his eyes that he wished to stay on. This vast and boundless land has several paths, but they all lead to one single destination. No matter which path you take, you must walk the path of winemaking. But wherever you go, remember to take these 2 jars of wine with you, as a reminder. Jun Moxie smiled. Song Shang, since your identity has been exposed, are you planning on leave this city? Even though Jun Moxie had asked this question, he was well aware that Song Shang wasn't going to leave. How could he, when he could stay here and learn to make such wine? Making quality wine had been his lifelong pursuit. So how could he leave when the secret of making such wine was within arm's reach? Even if his body was dismembered into 1,000 pieces, he still wouldn't leave. Since he was done here, Jun Moxie turned around and greeted the solitary falcon once again and then turned around to leave the shop. The solitary falcon interrupted his departure. Boy, how can you leave when we're not done yet? You still haven't settled my account yet. You owe me. Old man, you have no account with me, so it isn't good of you to ask me. I have no debts with you, and you have no credit over me. Jun Moxie smiled as he looked back at him. People usually owe me, not the other way around. If you think I owe you, then why don't you try and find me? Even though the solitary falcon's mouth opened to curse, his eyes still revealed the hint of a smile. Since you're playing tricks with this old man, maybe I will. Well then, if you can find me later, then we'll certainly settle our accounts. Jun Moxie glanced over at him one last time, and then sped away. If you find me later, then I'll definitely give you a reason to, haha. This kid was so calm even after learning my true identity. This is the first time I've ever seen someone with such a low Xian Qi maintain such composure. The prince's eyes revealed a hint of appreciation as the 3 men gazed at Jun Moxie's fleeting silhouette. He is certainly something beyond the usual. I agree with you, old man, this is a first for me as well, the solitary falcon agreed in dismay. He somehow managed to figure each one of us out but still managed to retain his own mystery. The solitary falcon had long realized that the youngster had figured his identity out as well. Else there would have been no reason why each and every words coming out from his mouth would be so targeted and associable. However, the solitary falcon was feeling a bit bizarre instead of angry for some reason. I knew he was flattering me all along, but then why was I still feeling so good about it? Hang on. What are you doing? The prince stopped Song Shang's actions midway, and glared at him with the eyes of a fire-breathing dragon. Even though you're the kid's apprentice now, it still doesn't mean that you can just pick up these 2 jars of wine and leave. Anyway, he intends on auctioning them, didn't you hear him? So, how much for them? Don't think that you can climb onto a high tree and take these 2 jars for yourself. Song Shang was in the process of stealthily taking away the 2 wine jars which Jun Moxie had left behind, and was intending on slipping out. I was the competitor and now his new disciple. You're just the referee. Why should you get these 2 wine jars? Song Shang glared argumentatively, unwilling to pass on the ownership of the wine jars without a fight. The referees are allowed to drink the leftovers. Would you disagree? The solitary falcon unceremoniously snatched the 2 jars from Song Shang's hands. The contest is over now. And you're the owner of this pub. It's your duty to go and get us something suitable to drink with our wine. Old Song didn't have the courage to say anything when confronted with the power and influence of a man like the solitary falcon. He bitterly turned around and went inside his shop to fetch the snacks. The solitary falcon and the prince hurriedly grabbed their glasses and poured themselves a drink. The prince couldn't help but feel the influence of brute strength, and the insidious effect that it could instill in the hearts of weaker men. In a corner far away from the pub, a woman stood dressed in black robes with a black veil concealing her face. As a gust of wind fluttered past her robes, it managed to lift her veil just enough to reveal her 2 bright and shiny eyes, which seemed to be burning in the flames of anger. Jun Moxie, you shamed and humiliated me. Today, you will pay for it with your life. Jun Xie won't be able to help you today, and neither would the 8th Grand Master you just befriended. Tonight, you'll die for sure. Miss, it is about to rain. You should find cover below. A black-masked man quietly came from behind her and whispered in her ear. No. I want to witness the ossification of Jun Moxie's bones to ash with my own eyes. Only then will this anger inside my heart truly subside. The black-robed woman remained motionlessly glued to her spot as she replied in a voice as cold and sharp as ice shards. Jun Moxie needs to return to his home before dark in order to attend a family dinner tonight. We've gone to great lengths in order to procure this information. Therefore we must seize this opportunity well. Yes, miss. Even though it was only the early hours of dusk at the moment, but a thick layer of dark clouds had already started to converge in sky, making the sky look a lot darker and gloomier at this time than usual. As the shrill autumn winds howled through the streets of the Tianxiang city, the clouds continued to narrow down the last remaining strand of silver lining in the sky above. The city's streets had already been emptied since the pedestrians had already sensed the ominous signal of the dark clouds and the mournful winds. Jun Wuyi had been forced to remain restricted to his wheelchair due to the presence of his guests. Why does it feel as if something is amiss? Jun Moxie was sitting in his palanquin, feeling extremely uneasy on the way back to his residence. I just won a contest. And I even acquired such a top-level Sky Xian apprentice. Then why am I not feeling any excitement? This is a strange phenomenon. Something is wrong. When was the last time I was this unsettled? Something is definitely wrong. This thought silenced Jun Moxie's mind as a burst of horror took control of his subconscious. Whether in this life or the previous, Jun Moxie had only felt this sensation when he was lurking on the fringes of a major danger. Moreover, this feeling of discomfort had saved his life many a times in the past. Is there any approaching danger? Is my existence under an immediate threat? Jun Moxie's entire body suddenly went cold as he subconsciously sunk into his seat. Whoosh! Whoosh! Numerous piercing sounds sounded all around without any warning as a myriad of weapons made their way through the empty street and towards the palanquin. Bow arrows, sleeve arrows, throwing knives, numerous concealed weapons flew through the sky in a mad frenzy. These weapons rained on his palanquin even more densely than the impending natural shower. Bang! A huge flying chain smashed off the roof of his palanquin. The 8 men accompanying Jun Moxie could be regarded as some of the best guards of the Jun family, and were able to react quickly enough to obstruct most of the weapons approaching their master's palanquin. 2 men were caught off guard and sustained injuries. but even they managed to retaliate by stopping some of the weapons. Protect the young master. The 8 men immediately surrounded the palanquin shoulder to shoulder as soon as the command sounded. Even though 2 men had arrows poking out of their lower bodies, they stationed themselves in front of their master's ride without making any sounds of agony. The sudden and usually dense wave of hidden weapons attack was followed by absolute silence. The wind, however, continued to howl through the streets of the city. Jun Moxie's heart sunk. Assassins. And they are well trained, organized. Plus they are being led by someone very experienced. The leader of the guards quickly issued his orders. The enemy is attacking from the shadows. Therefore we must split up into 2 groups. If need be, then you 2 will guard the young master from the front, while the 2 of you will guard him from the rear. If you need any help, then the 4 of us will immediately return to assist you. The young master's safety is the first priority. Everyone accepted the command with awe-inspiring bravery. No, don't. We must stay together. Jun Moxie's voice sounded from within the palanquin. The other side has more manpower, and they have a significantly higher amount of firepower as well. They have at least a dozen bow and arrows, sleeve arrows, as well as throwing knives, hammers, darts. They attacked from a long distance. But even then their attacks were simultaneous. They are very well organized. It's useless to split up when dealing with such an enemy. That will only accelerate the pace of our defeat and ensure our deaths. We only have one hope. Do you see that corner 10 feet away from here? Jun Moxie quickly analyzed the situation through the screens of his palanquin and commanded. Given his ability, making the corner wasn't an issue, but it was an entirely different matter as far as his guards were concerned. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 167. Torrent of Terror. Since the first volley of those concealed weapons had been focused on the palanquin, Jun Moxie had clearly understood that he was the intended target of the attackers. And now that the upper part of the palanquin had been smashed to pieces, he was certain that the assassins were simply waiting to see their reaction. If these assassins were to realize that their target has already died, then he was sure that these people would immediately turn around and leave without even coming out in the open. We'll make our way to that corner 10 feet away, and then we'll take the road which leads to the Jun residence. Jun Hu, the head of the guards, immediately whispered his command. Good. Now listen to my orders. And you're not allowed to oppose me. Else you'll be removed from the Jun family's command. Understood. Even though Jun Moxie's voice was barely audible, the severity of his command was evident from his tone. The 8 guards looked rather stumped by his words, but quickly realized that this wasn't the time to argue and hastily nodded. Jun Moxie had been able to spot that most of the concealed weapons had been issued at the back of golden-colored lights, while another 5 or 6 had originated from green-colored sources. But the most surprising thing was that the number of golden-colored sources was almost thrice as many as the green-colored ones. Who is trying to get me killed? Who's capable of organizing such an expensive lineup? Jun Moxie couldn't resist drawing a comparison. Even the assassination attempt on the princess wasn't half as strong as this one. Am I an even bigger target than the princess now? You will immediately abandon the palanquin, and then you'll move forward in full speed. I'm their target. You don't need to worry about me. I'll make my escape once you're gone. Jun Moxie calmly instructed. Jun Hu shook his head as he blankly stared in his master's direction. We will not abandon the young master under any circumstances. This is our only duty. We will not abandon you, young master. We'll defend you till our deaths. We cannot obey that command, young master. Nonsense. I'm your master, And as long as I'm alive, you will listen to every word of mine. Now obey the command. Jun Moxie patiently replied, it was obvious from their attacks that they are much stronger than you guys are. So you won't be able to do much even if you stay here and fight. However, you will end up becoming a burden for me if you stay. You have to get out now so I can get out of here with ease. We'll be waiting for you up ahead in that case, young master. And we'll try to attract as many troops as possible towards us. Jun, who didn't hesitate one bit while making up his mind. If the young master dies, then I will not wait for the martial judgment. I will immediately put a knife to my throat. And I'll kill myself. He ordered his men. And the 8 silhouettes immediately rushed out. I don't care who you are. Nor will I care about your instigator, since you've come to kill me. You should have come prepared to face the consequences. As Jun Moxie watched his 8 guards reaching the corner, the long-lost glimmer of a familiar glory shone in his eyes. It seems that it's unavoidable to divulge from the ways of my past today. So, it's time to kill. A monstrous smile surfaced on his face as his body sunk deeper into his seat. Like a snowflake in the summer sun, his body disappeared into the ground below without a trace, leaving the palanquin completely empty. The movement of the bodyguards had left the assassins baffled. They had been spying for several days now, and had even gone to the lengths of bribing local peddlers for gathering reliable information about Jun Moxie's activities. They were absolutely convinced that Jun Moxie was sitting inside the palanquin. But why are those guards abandoning the palanquin? Are they just trying to distract our attention? But that just doesn't make any sense. They didn't even peek into the palanquin to see if their master is alive or dead. They just fled. How could such irresponsible guards exist under this sun? But my sources were sure that these guards are most loyal to the Jun family, and weren't even afraid of sacrificing their lives for the sake of their masters. This is really weird. Could it be that the palanquin is really empty? No, that can't be. Just the elevation of the palanquin was enough to indicate that someone was inside the palanquin. Therefore, someone must still be in there. But there must be a reason why they are abandoning the palanquin and fleeing. Even though his head was swarming with several different possibilities, the leader of the assassins immediately issued his orders. 2 teams will go and stop those 8 guards. But make sure that you don't kill them all. At least 1 man must be taken captive. 1 team will follow after me, and will personally go and kill that evil bee **starred. A dozen silhouettes emerged from within the shadows of the surrounding area, and swiftly made their way towards the escaping guards. A few more assassins, who were already positioned in the direction of their escape, had already started engaging them in combat. Several more assassins came out of their hiding spots almost simultaneously, and then dispersed into 4 groups as they completely surrounded the palanquin. They quickly blocked every possible and imaginable exit route of the palanquin while their gleaming swords flickered and reflected their black masks. Young son of the Jun family, you can come out now. There are no loopholes in our plan, so it's pointless to struggle. The leader of the assassins slowly stated in a cold voice as he unsheathed his golden sword. You're still in there. I'm 100% sure of it. If you don't come out now, then I'll set your ride ablaze. The ominous hint of a sadistic pleasure gleamed in his eyes, revealing that he would genuinely enjoy this act of cruelty. The man repeated himself twice, but heard nothing apart from the constant clashing sounds coming from some distance away due to the confrontation between the guards and his 2 other teams. Even though those 8 guards were both outnumbered and less powerful as compared to their opponents, they were still bravely trying to attract as much attention onto themselves as possible. It was evident that they weren't fighting for their survival, but for that of their young masters, and were somehow able to match up to their aggressors in the backdrop of their bravery. Amidst the fierce fighting, a flag with flowery engraving on it suddenly rocketed into the sky. This is the Jun family's secret signal for help. The leader of the assassins already knew their secret signal, and knew that they would run into trouble if they didn't hurry. Hence, he waved his hands and ruthless ordered, "Burn him." 5 or 6 torches lit up at the same time, and were set in contact with the fabric of the palanquin and its bamboo structure. With the wind assisting their intention, the conflagration instantly took control of the palanquin's fate, while the faces of the arsonists rejoiced as they tried to imagine Jun Moxie's fruitless struggle for escape. However, their laughter came to an abrupt end. They were surprised upon realizing that the fire only gave rise to the snapping sounds of the palanquin's structure, but not of Jun Moxie's screams. Moreover, the only scent they could smell was that of burning inanimate objects, and not that of a living body. Ah, what's going on? Is that evil B***starred really not in the palanquin? 2 men simultaneously exposed the chains which were nicely concealed in their sleeves. These chains snaked out towards the palanquin and ripped open the vehicle's flaming structure. Not a soul in sight. Li Ji-woo. What is going on? An ice-cold voice sounded from a distance. The graceful and elegant body of a woman was watching from distance with a flavor of extreme disappointment in her eyes. We've been fooled, the leader. Li Ji-woo was startled by the sight of a silver bolt of lightning, which pierced through the dark of the clouds. This flashing light was followed by the crisp and bombarding sound of thunder. A torrent of rainfall came crashing down from the heavens above. At this point, the 8 bodyguards of Jun Moxie were still engaged in a fierce confrontation with a number almost twice of theirs, and even though they were somehow hanging tough, it was evident from the rate which they were consuming their xian qi, their blood would start to flow through the bare streets of the city very soon. In fact, if these men chose to flee at this point, some of them would actually be able to make an escape. However, they were still fighting back with the single-minded ambition of distracting their master's aggressors. "Hey, how's it going?" A ghostly figure suddenly appeared behind one of the black-masked men. The man turned around, only to find 2 slender fingers approaching his Adam's apple. Chuck. The eyes of the assassin froze in shock while his hands trembled twice as his feet recoiled backwards under the effect of his collapsing body. Since the appearance of this figure was too ambiguous, another one of the assassins was unable to spot it. All he saw was his collapsing comrade, and was unable to understand why his companion would choose to drop to the ground for no reason. "What are you doing?" he asked as he extended his hand to assist his companion. As the palm of his hand came in contact with his deceased companion's body, the remaining 15 or so of his companions hastily screamed, "Be careful." They were too late. The man felt a cold hand around his neck as his ears heard a crisp snapping sound of something breaking. The man was left perplexed to find that he was staring at his own buttocks. "What's going on? I was obviously looking in the forward direction. So why am I seeing my own butt?" As his thoughts ceased to exist, his body collapsed to the ground while his dead fish-like eyes continued to remain glued to his own buttock. This man was quite fortunate, especially when one considers the fact that he died a painless death, and saw only his own buttock in his last moments, and not some foreign object. However, his companions weren't destined to be as fortunate. Thunderbolts of lightning continued to accompany the falling torrents of rain. As the lightning continued to shine in the dark sky, almost everyone experienced an incredible but frightening torrent of terror. An erratic figure suddenly appeared in between 4 assassins. Almost like a ghost, no one saw where the figure came from, no one heard any sounds of its approach. Is he a god or a monster? Like a devil from a nightmare. One their eyes could see but hands couldn't touch. The monster leisurely cut their lives short. Helpless, they only stood there in passive acceptance of their fate. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 168. Slaughtered. This erratic ghostly figure only made one action. He actually made several actions simultaneously, but it was impossible to classify them as separate actions due to the degree of their simultaneity. His left foot silently but with visibly thunderous speed went straight up one of the assassin's crotch, while his left hand landed on the throat of the second assassin and poked a big hole in it. No one saw the speed with which his right hand reversed the neck of the third assassin and left him staring at his own buttock. Luckily, then, both his elbows landed straight into the back of the fourth assassin, who was facing the other side at that moment, unaware of this mysterious figure's presence behind him. Even though the assassin's back was unable to resist the elbows and crumbled inwards under the effect of the dual elbow strike, his body's flesh showed no signs of any injury. As a result, the first assassin was sent out screaming into the air, bleeding from all 7 apertures of his face, whilst the next 2 assassins swirled around and landed on the ground. The fourth one, however, was left wearing a strange look on his face. He landed on the ground in a weird posture while his bodily blood started to fuse into the mud below. Anyone could tell that all his bones inside his thoracic cavity had been shattered along with his spine. Another thunderbolt shone in the sky, and this mysterious figure instant disappeared and reappeared in the middle of another group of 6 assassins. In span no less than a blink of an eye, these 6 assassins were already dead as well. The rest of the assassins were staring in awe and fear. 6 well-trained and cold-blooded killers were vulnerable beyond words in front of this thing. He actually killed the 6 of them without borrowing any support from his Xian Qi. Who in this world incapable of killing 6 of such expert assassins in one swoop? "Follow me," the mysterious man shouted through the mask which was concealing his face. It was evident that he was addressing the Jun family's guards. "Please save the young master first," Jun Hu requested, even though he was panting with exhaustion. He hadn't yet finished his sentence before he found himself interrupted by this mysterious man. "Jun Moxie has already escaped. If you guys hadn't stayed back here, then he would have already gotten home by now." Realizing that their young master would have somehow made the corner and might have made his way towards the safety of the Jun mansion, the 8 guards finally breathed a sigh of relief and rushed forward to join their savior. The mysterious man didn't intend to boast, but had he not stopped to save these 8 guards, then the young master Jun would already made it home. Obviously, this mysterious man was Jun Moxie himself. After he had asked his guards to leave him, he had immediately removed his robe and had masked his face with its fabric. Then he had escaped into the earth below with the help of the yin-yang escape law. If it weren't for the task of rescuing his 8 bodyguards, then Jun Moxie would have straightaway made his way towards the Jun residence. After all, this location was quite close to the family's residence. Although Jun Moxie wasn't skilled enough to cover the entire distance in one single attempt, but he would managed it in multiple rounds with ease. Everyone was staring at his figure in awe. After all, who could have imagined that there would actually be someone in this world who could really traverse through the ground freely? This was simply unrealistic. To them, this phenomenon was beyond all forms of reasonable comprehension. Nothing like this had ever happened in the entire Xian continent before. No one had ever reported such a sighting. In fact, no one had even imagined it. However, the Hongjun Pagoda was an alien object for this world, and had long surpassed the limitation of Xian Qi. In this world obsessed with, and limited to Xian Qi, no one was capable of imagining the existence of such an object, let alone understand the profound meaning of the art of unlocking the heaven's fortune. Is his skill a gift of God, or the apparition of a monster? He was able to kill off 6 highly trained killers in the blink of an eye. How? It takes the human mind a while to switch between confusion and shock. And then it requires more time to process everything in between. Although those well-trained assassins were capable of doing all this in just a few tenths of a second, this time was enough for Hitman Jun to complete his task. In fact, this time was enough for Hitman Jun to eliminate them without even using his blade. The leader of the assassins, Li Ji-woo, by now had figured out that his targets were escaping, and so he quickly started to move after them, putting all his strength to work. His body almost elevated from the ground below as the yellow-colored light of his Xian Qi abnormally dazzled through the falling raindrops, making it seem as if a bright sun had suddenly appeared in the middle of a night-like ambience. The yellow-colored lights of two khaki-colored robed men also flashed beside him as they charged right behind him at an almost equivalent pace. These three assassins had decided to take the lead in chasing after their mysterious attacker. At the moment, Jun Moxie and his companions were being chased by almost a dozen killers, when suddenly a black-robed, black-masked man appeared right in front of them. He just stood there blocking their way ahead with a sword in his hand, and a deep look in his motionless eyes. Almost as if he was an unbreakable wall, unwilling to let Jun Moxie and his guards pass. A green-colored light flashed from his body as he geared up for the approaching escapees. A Jade Xian expert. This person must be the leader of those two groups. This person had no intention of using his Xian Qi to kill his escaping targets, and only intended on doing just the right amount of hard work. His only aim was to resist Jun Moxie's party long enough for his comrades to catch up and encircle the escapees. Obviously, once the 9 escaping men were surrounded by the remaining killers, the escaping men wouldn't be able to last long enough to see the Jun families en route support. Just a matter of moments would be enough to decide the fate of their lives. However, Jun Moxie's guards were charging forward like sharp daggers, knowing that they were being led by a mysterious but all-conquering spear at the front. A green light flashed as this man stepped backwards to assess the situation better, making the water in the puddles underneath his feet splash in all directions. This Jade Xian expert was already beginning to have second thoughts. This mysterious figure must be one the best from the Jun family. Then, he raised his sword and burst forward again. This Jade Xian killer had been practicing his swordplay for decades and now seemed confident of matching his opposition. In fact, it could even be said that the man was so confident of his ability that he would even be willing to match his sword against a spirit Xian for a few seconds. Who is this mysterious masked expert? I haven't been able to see his Xian Qi light yet, but I know that he's no rookie. Could this expert be a spirit Xian? If I died defending my line of defense against a spirit Xian, then it would indeed be a matter of honor. Even though the heart of this Jade Xian expert had gone numb, the fire of this thought had propelled his body to move forward and confront this mysterious expert. Nah, this is absolutely impossible. This is ridiculous. If he was genuinely a spirit Xian expert, then he could have killed us all in the blink of an eye. So why would he chose to kill us one by one? Besides, spirit Xian experts can't be found everywhere. They are spirit Xian masters, not cabbage. As his mind processed this information and added more fuel to his actions, he accelerated the pace of his advance and charged forward even faster, almost at the speed of lightning. The eyes of this killer were gleaming so brightly in the colors of excitement that it seemed as if he had completely forgotten the fear of death in the background of this legendary situation. As their bodies approached closers, Jun Moxie's body didn't slow down even to the last step, but his entire upper body twisted in a strange manner at the last moment, almost to the point where it seemed to be defying the laws of nature. His waist had twisted in a manner which would allow him to face his attacker from the side while his face had already moved past his attacker's body. This is simply bizarre. Is there anything that this guy can't do? Whoosh! Even though the Jade Xian assassin was taken aback by Jun Moxie's maneuver, his blade still managed to pierce past Jun Moxie's chest clothing and tore out his shirt. In fact, the blade was so close to his body that its face practically came in contact with Jun Moxie's chest, but its sharp edges were only able to slash the raindrops which fell from the sky above. Although Jun Moxie's movement had been exceptionally fast, but the speed and expertise of his attacker's strike was beyond the human body's limit of making a complete escape, owing to which the blade ended up rubbing Jun Moxie's chest. But this minor sacrifice of his clothing was completely worth it. Because Jun Moxie's bullet-like body had crashed straight into this Jade Xian expert's, while Jun Moxie's hands had managed to reach their desired destination. The Jade Xian expert's feet were lifted off the ground under the effect of the huge momentum and massive inertia of Jun Moxie's advance, forcing his body to advance forward. Well, Jun Moxie was moving forward, but he was moving backwards. Involuntarily, of course. His mind was still in an excited state, but his body had started moving against the direction of his mind's command. Just when the Jade Xian expert's eyes started to change their reflection from the excitement of his brutal advance to the extremity of his shock, Jun Moxie's right elbow heavily bombarded the cavity of his chest. Boom! Snap, however. This sound was muffled by the sound of thunder. Even his nerve cells were too slow to react. The pain from this first strike hadn't even reached his brain cells yet when 3 of Jun Moxie's right palm's fingers found their way to his throat and split it open. Another faint snapping sound was issued as his fragile throat's bone was pulled out of his body. His head was forcefully raised upwards under the effect of the second attack, but only to find Jun Moxie's left hand's 2 fingers waiting there. His left hand had moved almost at the same time as his right one, and now his 2 fingers were plugged into his obstruction's eye sockets. A black, white, and red liquid projected outwards as Jun Moxie pulled his fingers out. But that wasn't the end of it yet. Jun Moxie's left knee was also projecting upwards to meet this Jade Xian's crotch in the hope of a high-impact collision. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 169. Coming out safely. A very fierce method. However, Jun Moxie wasn't regarding this method as fierce or even ruthless, but as simply necessary. Each individual attack of this series was fatal, and their combined impact over such a short duration had made them even more so. The reason he considered these attacks to be necessary was simple: their path was being obstructed by a Jade Xian, and the only way to get out was to either use the yin-yang escape law or go for overkill without using his Xian Qi, since he was well aware that he couldn't break through a stronger enemy's Xian Qi protection. In case he used the yin-yang escape law to get past the man, he was sure to stop and kill his guards. You will need to die, my friend. It's better that you die than us. Therefore you must die. Jun Moxie was well aware that he couldn't afford to stall for even 1 second, else he would have a difficult time in getting everyone to safety, and therefore he had raining such powerful and consecutive strikes onto the assassin's body. As far as Jun Moxie was concerned, that Jade Xian assassin only had himself to blame for his miserable death. Had the man not been so powerful, then he too would have died as painlessly as his comrades. Even though Jun Moxie had landed several fatal blows onto the man's body in a flash, he had still managed to maintain his forward velocity while the body of the Jade Xian assassin had hung onto his own as the 2 of them bolted forward. Boom! Just as Jun Moxie's knee landed the final blow, the body of the Jade Xian assassin suddenly split apart. His 4 limbs detached from the rest of his body and flew out in 4 different directions, while his head dismembered from the core of his body and flew over Jun Moxie's head. The body which had been hanging onto Jun Moxie's had now suddenly dismembered into 100 fragments. The deceased assassin's bones and flesh were now flying out in different directions while his blood was merging into the falling raindrops. Jun Moxie's 8 bodyguards quickly made their way forward through the blood and rain without slowing down. In fact, they weren't required to slow down at all during this in-motion combat sequence. The assassins who were chasing them had also seen this sequence very clearly. In their eyes, this demonic figure had just opened up a big and red hole in the body of their lieutenant, and had just torn his body apart like a piece of paper. The escaping men continued to breeze forward and made another corner, and were relieved to realize that they had finally made it to safety. A few gorgeously glittering Xian-Qi lights were quickly braving their way through the rain and towards them. The Jun family support troops were arriving. Xiao-Qi. Li Ji-Wu was running forward as fast as possible as he continued to stare at the rainy sky while his comrade's head spiraled through the air. He came to stop as the head landed on the ground, and rolled over twice and came to a halt next to his feet. His comrade's lifeless face was turned upwards, but was missing 2 eyes. His face was still carrying a ferocious expression on it, even the traces of his sadistic smile were still frozen on his lifeless face. It was almost as if the man had been struck by lightning and had been unable to change his facial expression before succumbing to his death. Even though these 2 men were unrelated by flesh, they had become brothers in bond over the numerous risky assignments that they had taken together over these past few decades. And now his brother's dismembered face was lying next to his feet. Even if he managed to pick up his brother's entire body, Li Ji-Wu knew that he still wouldn't be able to piece it back together. What is this strange feeling? The black-robed leader of the assassins could feel his blood boiling. He could still hear Xiao-Qi boasting about his smart and quick-witted son, and about his kind and loving wife. He even remembered Xiao-Qi mentioning that he would wash his hands clean of this life after this final assignment, and would then concentrate on rearing his family along with his wife, far away from this city, like normal people, and would live happily ever after. He could clearly hear his friend's words and could even see the desire in his eyes as he had said, "I'm sick and tired of this blood-soaked way of life." And then, just now his friend had obeyed his own command and had charged forward to stop their escaping targets. And just now he had died in front of his own eyes. And had died in the most gruesome manner possible. Just because of his one command. "Who are you? I dare you to leave your name behind." Li Ji-Wu roared as he stood motionlessly in the rain. His voice sounded as shrill as that of an old ape. "Who are you?" A crisscross lightning bolt lit up the sky once again, and the sounds of thunder started to ring endlessly from the sky above, like drums on a battlefield, powerful and heavy, suppressive and bloody. The hitman Jun shouted back loudly, "I dare you to tell me your name." Since the Jun family's reinforcements had arrived, the situation had completely reversed. And Jun Moxie had already realized that the leader of his attackers had lost his mind to chaos upon losing his friend, and was hoping to take full advantage of it. Li Ji-Wu shouted back hatefully, "I am, you'd *MNB* starred, at least have the guts to tell me your name." He realized his enemy's intentions at the last second, and withheld his name. But no one answered back. However, the Jun family's reinforcements were already galloping at full speed since they had spotted the situation. "Withdraw," a cold voice originated from the throat of a slender black-dressed woman. Her wet hairs were pasted against her beautiful face, and one could clearly see through her veil and tell that her pupils had gone completely cold with pain and disappointment. However, despite all of it, she was still categorical enough to issue the command for retreat. Li Ji-Wu immediately returned to his senses, and bent down to pick up his friend's head. He tried to scream one last threat. But his voice broke before he could find his words, and so he simply stared at the backs of Jun Moxie and his guards. His eyes were blatantly exposing the sea of hatred which was turning and twisting inside his heart. Then, he turned around and left without saying anything more. "Brother Xiao Qi, I'll take you home." His two tragic and teary eyes quietly disappeared into the dark of the streets. The remaining of assassins were unable to fetch the bodies of their friends, and were forced to leave their fallen behind. By the time the Jun platoon arrived, all they saw was a collection of dead and cold bodies on the floor. Jun Moxie had already settled the immediate crisis, and had somehow managed to spoil the assassination attempt on his life. A yellowish light flickered from far away, almost as if it was flying in the dark sky, and landed straight in front of the 8 bodyguards. "Where is the young master?" It was the butler, Old Pang. This old and loyal butler of the Jun family was a peak Earth Xian expert in reality. The 8 people were left stunned upon realizing this truth in that moment. The masked man had said that the young master is safe. But where is he? Where did young master go? He didn't get home yet? With no concrete answer to give, they just continued to stare at each other blankly. Old Pang's face started to wrinkle as his eyebrows gradually started to rise. He gloomily asked, "Did you really abandon the young master and escaped alone?" His voice was already beginning to reek of his murderous intentions. That's a mysterious expert said that he had rescued the young master. We were completely encircled by the enemy at that time. But he also rescued us. The young master didn't reach home." Jun, whose eyes were fixed on the ground while his head was lowered with shame. He was well aware that if his young master is dead, then his life and that of his men wouldn't even remotely be enough to compensate for the loss. A mysterious master? Who was that mysterious master? Where is he? Old Pang's tone continued to get colder with each question he asked. "Did you really abandon the young master on the word of an unknown man? And then you just rushed out to ensure your own safety? Is that what you joined this family for?" Pop! The 8 men simultaneously knelt to the ground in the pouring rain with nothing to say in their defense, and seemingly ready to accept their penalty. Old Pang sighed and grunted, "Jun Hu, it's a pity that we accepted you into the family, trained you and then trusted you with the safety of the young master. We gave you the responsibility of his safety. And now the fate of the young master's life is unknown. You're held in capital offense in accordance with the military regulations. What do you have to say about that?" "I have nothing to say in my defense. I accept my punishment." Jun, who remained knelt on the ground as the blood and rain poured over his expressionless face. He could have said many things, such as, he had only obeyed the command of his young master, and that since the young master was the only intended target, he had broken away from the young master in order to attract the attention of the enemy. He could have spoken about the valor which he fought, he could have said all of it, but he chose to keep quiet. He was well aware that if anything untoward had happened to his young master, then all his explanations weren't worth anything, since it would still mean that he failed in his line of duty. "Hang on." Jun Moxie jumped over the adjacent wall and ran over. "Old Pang, please don't blame these people wrongly. If Jun, who hadn't fought so bravely and distracted the enemy, then I wouldn't have been able to get away." Jun Moxie narrated the tale of Jun Hu's bravery. "Is that so?" Old Pang's face immediately calmed down. "Why didn't you say so?" Then he looked around and asked, "Where's that mysterious expert who saved you all?" "This person saved the life of the young master. The entire family is in his debt, and so he must be rewarded accordingly. He went in that direction, but he was too agile, and therefore I cannot be too sure which way he went afterwards." Jun, who raised his finger and pointed in Jun Moxie's direction, whilst still kneeling on the ground. That man was really weird, he threw me straight to the ground. Jun Moxie brushed his forehead almost as if it was bruised. He actually kicked me after saving my life and left without saying goodbye. What did this person look like? Old Pang's mind started shuffling through several ideas. His face was masked, so it's impossible to tell. Jun Moxie and Jun who spoke up at the same time. Even though Jun Moxie's voice seemed ignorant, Jun whose tone seemed full of gratitude. Old Pang waved his hand as he stated in a deep voice, "You eight will report to the master of the house. And you'll tell him the entire story without any omissions. And then you'll wait for the master's judgment." Yes, the 8 men readily agreed and stood up on their feet once again. Please subscribe to this channel, so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 170. Clues. Young Master. Now, how will you participate in the family dinner now? Old Pang took an umbrella from the guard behind him, and held it above Jun Moxie's head. Not an issue. I didn't sustain any injuries. Jun Moxie answered in a heroic manner, "This was just a small incident. I've been through worse." Even though Old Pang's mouth parted to open, but he didn't speak. He could tell that Jun Moxie had indeed gotten used to these affairs. The young master had sustained a few injuries during the last assassination attempt on the princess. Compared to that, this assassination attempt on the young master's life was nothing, since the young master is perfectly unharmed. In that case, you must return to the residence, young master. The master and the Guan family have been waiting a long time now. Old Pang stated. Just a minute. But first I have to go back because I need to take a look at my palanquin. There should still be something inside it. Jun Moxie took the umbrella and turned around. The palanquin was first attacked by concealed weapons, and was then set ablaze. And now this rain has turned it into a pile of dirt and ash. What could possibly be still left in it? Even though Old Pang didn't quite agree, he still followed after Jun Moxie for the sake of keeping him safe. Jun Moxie circled around the remains of the palanquin a few times like a fly, and then bent down to pick something up from the floor, and then first looked east, then west, and then swirled around in a circle once. Then he handed the umbrella back to Old Pang and said, "Let's go. I don't think that the weapon you just picked up belongs to you, young master." Old Pang's keen peak Earth-Xian eyes were capable enough of spotting the item that Jun Moxie had just picked up. You just walked all the way over to here for picking up a concealed weapon which was left behind the enemy? These kinds of weapons are very common. It's common sense to know that this will give us no clues. The young master considers himself to be too smart. Even though he had seen Jun Moxie picking up that weapon, he hadn't noticed the way his eye had lit up or the "Is that so?" smile on Jun Moxie's face at that moment. Even the pouring rain and fierce winds weren't enough to completely wash away all the traces of the assassins. Though some minor traces still lingered, the Jun family's sleuths weren't capable of understanding or interpreting them. For example, the wind was still carrying a faint fragrance with it. Even though the fragrance was so faint that a normal person wouldn't exactly be able to tell things apart. But Jun Moxie's amplified senses were keen enough to detect it. And then there had been a hint of familiarity in that withdraw command. These two factors were alone enough. A wretched smile creased onto his face as he put 2 and 2 together. Upon reaching home, Jun Moxie found his grandfather standing at the gate of the hallway. The old man's eyes scanned his grandson from head to toe but found no scratch on his body. He frowned his brows in rebuke. "When will you be strong enough for me to stop worrying about you? Now go and change your clothes." Jun Moxie obediently left for his room even though he didn't quite agree with his grandfather. He quickly changed his clothes and entered the dining hall, and found that the food and beverages had already been set on the table. Jun Xie was sitting in his wheelchair with a thin layer of blanket atop his legs. He looked at Jun Moxie, smiled faintly and whispered in a low voice, "I don't know what kind of skills would be required to handle this matter in such a neat manner." Moxie, your uncle is very curious. You have to tell me about the origins of these mysterious skills. Don't say that you don't know anything about it. Uncle. This big world is filled with all kinds of wonders. And some extraordinary talents. This. Jun Moxie smiled mischievously. Stop. I don't want that talk again. Jun Xie widened his eyes to stare at his nephew. What about those people? Do you have any idea about them? I did get some idea about them. I might be able to track down a few of them. Jun Moxie winked. Should I send some more men to assist you? Jun Wuyi's expression suddenly became very cold. Those B***stards tried to assassinate my Moxie. Therefore they must die. That time hasn't come yet. Jun Moxie smiled back. They've given us something to build on. But if we send out our men after them right now, then we'll only make them more cautious. You mean, you already know who's behind this? Jun Wuyi's eyes lit up. Uncle, your clear-as-flame foresight is capable of planning battle strategies from a tent and can win a battle from 1,000 miles away. Jun Moxie mockingly flattered. Jun Wuyi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Guan family? Jun Moxie asked out of curiosity. We've organized this banquet for them. So why aren't they here yet? They are in your sister-in-law's courtyard. Qing Han had a fit of rage. Jun Wuyi smiled subtly. This is their internal family matter after all. Therefore it's all right to wait a while. As he said these last words, Jun Moxie turned his head to look outside into the rain and spotted a queue of individuals slowly making their way towards the dining area. It was the Guan family. A total of 5 from Guan family had showed up for the dinner, with a beautiful but ice-faced Guan Qing Han leading the way, followed by a thin and tall, middle-aged man dressed in a green robe. Even though his robes were fluttering in the wind, but his clothes were completely dry, almost as if his clothes were impervious to the rain outside. The man behind Guan Qing Han was her father, Guan Donglu. He was also the head of the Guan family. Behind Guan Donglu was a burly-looking old man. Even though his hair and scanty beard were gray, but his body was still very big and sturdy. The sharpness of his eyes seemed to resemble that of a leopard, and his tiger-like walk made it rather evident that this man, Guan Rushan, was one of the finest warriors of the Guan family. Guan Rushan was followed by 2 long-faced, jade-shaded, elegant, smart and handsome youngsters. These 2 youngsters were Guan Qing Han's elder brothers. The eldest one was named Guan Qing Bo, while the second son's name was Guan Qing Yu. Guan Qing Han was a very elegant and beautiful young woman, but her 2 brothers' elegance and looks were at par with hers. This family has excellent genes, really excellent ones. Jun Moxie thought, they look like embroideries on a pillow cover, don't they? Brother Guan. Jun Wuyi greeted Guan Donglu by cupping his hands in a traditional manner while remaining in his wheelchair. Brother Jun. There's no need for such formalities. Guan Donglu smiled radiantly as he cupped his hands to return the greeting, and then signaled his 2 sons to step forward and greet Jun Wuyi. The 3rd generation of the Jun family is indeed very handsome, graceful and bears extraordinary talents. Brother Jun, the future of your family is indeed in very secure hands. Guan Donglu looked sideways at Jun Moxie and smiled affectionately. The sincere and complimenting manner in which he stated these insulting words to the new master of the house was indeed very fascinating. Jun Moxie could already tell that maintaining control of the relationship with a man of such diplomatic skill could be a very difficult task. But at this moment, Jun Moxie's eyes suddenly diverted towards youngster at the back, Guan Qingyu, who had intentionally or otherwise hidden his body behind his father's in an instant. His eyes had revealed a hint of anger at first upon seeing Jun Moxie, which had quickly transformed to shock and surprise, almost as if he wasn't expecting to see Jun Moxie here. Even though that look in his eyes had disappeared so quickly that no one else was able to notice it, but he still wasn't able to hide it from the keen and perceptive eyes of the hitman. Jun Moxie couldn't help but wonder, what's the reason behind that look in his eyes? He searched his entire memory in order to determine whether he or the previous Jun Moxie had any kind of an association with the youngster, but only found that not only had he never had any sort of an association with the youngster, he had never even seen the man's face before. But then why did he look so shocked after seeing me? What am I missing here? Even though Jun Moxie's mind was busy juggling a plethora of thoughts, his surface expressions were indifferent to it as he stepped forward and smiled courteously to greet Guan Qingbo and Guan Qingyu. Jun Moxie had heard that the two brothers of his sister-in-laws had interests similar to the previous Jun Moxie. It was customary for the host family to entertain their guests. The older generation was responsible for the entertainment of their counterparts, while the younger generation was responsible for looking after theirs. Since Jun Moxie was the only youngster in the Jun family, the burden of entertaining these two youngsters naturally fell onto his shoulders. Third young master. The two youngsters cupped their hands in greeting. Even though this was his usual title of address from strangers, it was still rather weird coming from the elder brothers of his sister-in-law, since the appropriate term of address would have been brother or younger brother. The Guan family was based out the Jianghu province, and though their region of residence was fairly small, but the family was still quite wealthy and influential since they were practically the overlords of the territory. The young generation of such a family obviously must be aware of the appropriate terms of address. This title of address alone was enough to reflect that these two youngsters didn't consider Jun Moxie to be their sister's brother-in-law and were plainly considering him to be a powerful family's young descendant. Just this one, third young master, was enough to reveal a lot of information to Jun Moxie. Suddenly, a warm smile surfaced on his face as he extended one arm and led the younger of the two men into a more isolated corner of the dining hall. Guan Qingyu's arm shook as Jun Moxie pulled him away, and although this vibration was extremely subtle, but Jun Moxie was clearly able to sense the fear inside this young man's heart. Even though his face wasn't reflecting anything, his mind was constantly considering all sorts of circumstances. Could it be that? Even though Jun Moxie's mind was busy making its calculations, his mouth was free to talk. You guys have traveled thousands of miles to get to the Tianxiang city, and I've failed to entertain you for the first 2 days of your stay here. Brothers. Guan Qingbo elegantly smiled and said, "There's no need for any formalities. Our first 2 days in the Tianxiang city have been quite wonderful anyway, and we've managed to keep ourselves amused. We met a lot of new people, and have come to realize that this place is indeed worthy of being called the capital city of the Tianxiang Empire. We've kept ourselves very busy, brother, so there's no need to apologize." Really, haha. Guan Qingbo's nature had taken after his father, which was evident from the fitting choice of words he selected to reply with. Jun Moxie had been informed that Guan Qingbo was just as interested in certain activities as the previous Jun Moxie had been, but that wasn't even remotely visible from the sophisticated manner in which he was conducting himself. Oh. Jun Moxie sneakily moved closer, and said in a low voice, "Then I can guarantee a place which will bring the brothers more joy than any other place ever has." What place? Guan Qingbo asked in a low voice. A wretched smile surfaced on Jun Moxie's face, the kind that only a man can understand. He quickly glanced around at Guan Qinghan to ensure that he was standing at a safe distance away from her. Spirit Fog Lake. That place is every man's paradise. Ah, you just can't miss it. Guan Qingyu's face suddenly and violently twitched for a second the moment he heard the words, Spirit Fog Lake. This story will be continued to chapter 171. For those of you who are not subscribed yet, please subscribe. The interesting and best stories will be updated. See you again in the next episode.